joined by AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka. But first, to discuss the other big story this week, the unrest in the Middle East and the violence in Libya by the regime of Muammar Gaddafi, we want to bring in the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, John McCAIN, who has been traveling in the Middle East this week, including stops in Tunisia, Lebanon, and Jordan. And he joins us this morning from the very busy Cairo. Senator McCAIN, welcome.
Thank you, David.
I want to ask you first about Libya and events that are moving very quickly, including the U.S. response. The president has made it clear that he wants Gaddafi to go. His ambassador to the United Nations, Susan Rice, speaking after a vote in the Security Council in favor of sanctions against Libya, imposing an arms embargo, urging member countries to freeze assets of the Gaddafi family. And this is what Ambassador Rice said during that debate.
When a leader's only means of staying in power is to use mass violence against its own people, he has lost the legitimacy to rule and needs to do what is right for his country by leaving now.
Senator, the question is, how is that achieved?
Well, first of all, I agree with that statement, but I'd also like to point out that we could impose and could have imposed a no-fly zone. They would have stopped flying if that had been imposed. They're using air power and helicopters to continue these massacres. We should recognize a provisional government somewhere in eastern Libya, perhaps Benghazi. We should make it clear that we will provide assistance to that provisional government. And finally, we should make it absolutely clear that anyone who continues or is engaged in these kinds of barbarous acts are going to find themselves on trial in a war crimes tribunal. We've got to really get tough.
And by get tough, if you talk about a no-fly zone, would you stop short there? I mean, you're certainly raising the specter of some kind of military intervention on the part of the U.S. and its allies to stop Gaddafi, to force him to go.
Well, I think that providing the so-called provisional government, and there will be one, with the equipment and material that they could use, the no-fly zone, I think, would be a very strong signal. I'm not ready to use ground forces or further intervention than that. Look, Gaddafi's days are numbered. The question is how many, and how many people are going to be massacred before he leads one way or the other. I think those measures that I just mentioned could hasten his demise.
Let me ask you about Egypt. We have an image of you earlier in the day in Tahrir Square where there are still protesters. The critical question is building the building blocks of a democratic government there. How is that going?
I think it's going along. We met with some of the young opposition leaders, these real heroes. I was awed to be in their company about what needs to happen. There's still significant divisions, but I think they are headed in the right direction. I think there are questions about how soon to have an election, whether to have a presidential election before the parliamentary elections, but I believe that there's every good chance they can succeed.
Senator McCAIN, you're in the region. We're watching what could be called an Arab Spring, an historic movement. It's also a game-changing movement for the United States and our interests there. It's my understanding the president has ordered a complete review of Middle East strategy. I know that our defense leaders have also called for instant contingency planning. As you survey the area, how do we reassess both emergencies there and our interests there?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that this winds of change are going to be confined to blowing just in the Arab world and the Maghreb. I think it's going to be all over the world, to wit, what's happening in China and in other countries around the world. Second of all, return to our fundamentals, and that is that all of us are endowed with certain inalienable rights. Respect democracy, further it, recognize that the longer there's a dictatorship, the bigger the explosion is going to be once that people become dissatisfied enough. Recognize that we have to assist these countries, and it is in our national interest to do so. And the economy is a vital and the most important permanent part of any successful transition to democracy and freedom. And frankly, we should have done more in the past. I think we should all admit that.
But what about contingency planning? Are there contingencies that may arise now that are particularly worrisome to you?
I think it's not clear where this revolution goes in all of these countries, and every country is very different from each other. I think we should understand that Iran can take advantage of this unsettling situations in these countries. We should be standing up for democracy in Iran. We should be backing their protesters with our moral support, which we didn't in 2009.
I want to ask to get your reaction about something that Secretary of Defense Robert Gates has said this week about U.S. intervention into the Middle East and into Asia. This is what he said at West Point on Friday.
In my opinion, any future defense secretary who advises the president to again send a big American land army into Asia or into the Middle East or Africa should have his head examined, as General MacArthur so delicately put it.
How do you respond to that, Senator?
I have the highest regard for Secretary Gates. I think he's one of the finest secretaries of defense in the history of our country and a great patriot. I think there are times, however, and I'm sure he would say this, where it does require U.S. military intervention. Afghanistan is the genesis of 9/11, as you know. We had to stamp out the situation, get the situation there under control so that it would not continue to be a base for attacks on the United States and our allies. But I also understand the implications of the needs of a new kind of warfare to counter this radical Islamic extremism wherever it rears its head, particularly in those continents that he referred to.
Finally, Senator McCain, I just wanted to get your reaction to something that came out of Rolling Stone magazine that I'm sure you're aware of this week. Here was a picture with you in Kabul with Lieutenant General William Caldwell. And this is the piece by Rolling Stone featuring him. It says this: the U.S. Army illegally ordered a team of soldiers specializing in psychological operations to manipulate visiting American senators into providing more troops and funding for the war, Rolling Stone has learned. And when an officer tried to stop the operation, he was railroaded by military investigators. As you know, General Petraeus is now investigating this. What happened?
Well, you know, that's been tried on me in the past, David. I don't know what's happened. I do know that the General Caldwell is a great leader and has done a great job in leading the Afghan army. I also know that these briefers are briefed. You know, Senator X is interested in the following, A, B, C, D, and E, and that I think is perfectly legitimate. Now, if it went any further than that, I don't know. General Petraeus will make a full investigation. General Caldwell has steadfastly denied it, but I don't see how it could have affected my positions in any way, and so we'll see what happens, but I'm put me down as skeptical.
Senator McCain, we will leave it there. Thank you very much and safe travels.